It's Captain Kevin here. In today's video, we're going to go over the introduction flight, tutorial flight that came with the PMDG Boeing 747-400 Queen of the Skies 2. This is the latest 747 product that PMDG has come out with, and it does come with the 113-page tutorial flight, so we're going to go ahead and do it because 113 pages is a lot, and I understand that people might look at 113 pages and think it's quite daunting, but I'm going to show you that it's actually not that difficult, or it's got all the information you need for an introductory flight, and a lot of it just screenshots, but there are people out there that are more visual learners and learn better if they see what's going on, so we're going to go ahead and do that. As a point of note, this is not an official PMDG video. I did, however, get permission from PMDG to do this video. Also, disclaimer, I'm not a certified pilot. I am, however, a certified airframe and powerplant mechanic and a certified flight dispatcher. So if you will follow along the introductory manual, or the tutorial flight, we're going to go ahead and tackle this. So the first couple pages we're not going to worry about. That's just legalese, copyrights and licensing and stuff, and then of course the table of contents, so we're not going to worry about that. We're on page 6 that basically just describes what the purpose of the tutorial is. So now we go to page 7. The flight that we're going to be operating is from Denver to San Francisco, and it lists what sceneries we could use for this flight. You could use the Flight Beam Studios Denver International Airport, which is what we're using here. Flight Beam Studios San Francisco International Airport, which we will be using on our arrival into San Francisco. And Orbex has the Global Base, Vector, and Open Land Class products, which we're also using here. So the flight that we're going to be operating is based on a route that was used in the past by a major real-world 747-400 operator. I can only guess which carrier that might be based on the airports we're flying to. This is going to be about a 2-hour flight. We're going to be taking off from runway 17 right here. The manual says we're going to fly the course 3 departure, and then fly the Diam 3 arrival into runway 28 right at San Francisco. Point of note, this product was released back in 2017, so the information that's outlined here is based on information that was written at the time. Obviously, with it being May 28th, 2023 today, about 6 years after release, procedures have changed, so there's going to be some slight differences, but it's not going to be too major to where it would really make a huge difference. So with the updated nav data we're using here, we're just going to go with it. For the purpose of the flight, we're not going to be using any weather, because if we do, there's a lot more information that gets involved, and we're not going to deal with that for this flight. And there's no safe flights with this tutorial because PMDG wants you to be able to figure out how to set the airplane up. So now we're on to page 9, and that basically tells you that what I just said regarding the navigation data being out of date. So I'm going to skip that. So now we're on to page 10, and it's just, at this point, we're just setting up the airplane. So you want to select the Boeing 747-400 PMDG house livery, November 744 Papa Mike 2017. As you can see by the registration plate, we are in that airplane, November 744 Papa Mike. This is the Boeing 747-400 powered by the Pratt & Whitney PW4056. And it's important that you select this particular airplane and not any other airplane for the purpose of the tutorial, because of the ways that the airplane can be customized based on the airlines. Different airlines obviously have different configurations. So we want to make sure that everybody's that's going to follow the tutorial is using the same airplane, just so everybody sees the same thing. And then when you select the airport, in the ID field, you're going to type in Kilo Delta Echo November. That's the ICAO code for Denver International Airport. And then the departure is going to be runway 17 right, which we are at now. The time of day, set the time to 10:30 a.m. Do note that that's 10:30 local time. If you look at the chronometer on the left, you will note that it reads 16:40. So that's about 10 minutes past 10:30. So the 16:40 is UTC time, Zulu time, which is what you use in aviation. But the local time now would be 10:40. It's only a 10-minute difference, so it's not going to make too much of a difference. And it's going to be a daytime flight and it's a short flight, so at this point we're pretty much good. It says here this tutorial was written during the winter December/January season, but feel free to select a different season if you'd like. I've selected today's date, May 28th, 2023. And then under the weather, you want to select clear skies. You don't want to be putting in any weather because that's going to change a few things for the flight, and for the purpose of the tutorial, we're not going to do that. Do not touch the fuel and payload editor in P3D. This airplane is very complex, and if you try to use the default fuel and payload editor, you're going to cause kerfuffles with the airplane. The only way to deal with the fuel and payload is by the FMC, which we will do in a bit. So once you load the airplane, the airplane's going to run a 20-second initialization, just loading everything up, making sure everything's good to go. During the 20 seconds, do not touch anything. There's a message at the bar telling you how much time you have left, and once that message bar goes away, then you're free to do whatever you need to do to get your flight set up. But during those 20 seconds, don't touch anything. Once the initialization is complete, set the parking brakes. You could do controlled period, or use the parking brake lever, which is down there. As you can see, we already have the parking brakes set, because right now we're just sitting here. We don't want the airplane moving. You may hear the runway awareness and advisory system tell you you're on runway 17 right. This is normal. Right now it's not doing that, which is good. And look, we're already on page 13. Basically, it tells you that we're gonna start setting up the fuel and payload, and now we're already on page 14. So we're gonna go ahead and lower the yoke. Now, on the actual airplane, you can't do that, and really it's not necessary, but for simulation purposes, PMDG has implemented that feature, because on the actual airplane you could basically move your head around the yoke and look at the FMC if need be, or move your body around. It's not easy to do that in the simulator unless you have something like Track IR. Most people don't, so this is just for ease of access. So if we go to the FMC, we're already on page 15. The keys on the left and right side are the line select keys. So you got line select key 1 left, which is where the 747-400 line is, then 2 left is where the AIRAC line is, and so on, and then of course the right side as well. I'm skipping down the manual because there's information that's not really pertinent here, at least for this purpose. We are flying the airplane in pounds, so PMDG does have the manual written in both pounds and kilograms, but this particular airplane is set up to pounds, so we're going to do that. And now, if you're not on the menu page, go ahead and click menu. I'm sorry, yeah, the menu page. and then go to FS Actions page. You'll come across the FS Actions page. So that's line select key 6 right to do that. And then to load the fuel, we're going to go line select key 1 left. And if you're running the default state that came, the panel state that came with the airplane, or you're just not having it load 1 at all, it's going to load the airplane completely full of fuel. For this flight, we're going to be flying with 75,000 pounds of fuel, so you type in 75,000, and then line select key 1 left, where the total fuel is. It's going to be a little bit off, but I'm not going to worry about 3 pounds. Important thing to note, if you're running with a full load of fuel, you do want to look at the overhead, because you're going to have the override pumps turned on, the crossfeed pumps turned on, the center pumps turned on. And if that's the case, you do want to turn them off. I will cover the fuel configuration in another video, but right now we're not going to worry too much about that. So your fuel panel should look like this. Once you have it set up properly, then the ICAS caution message should go away. So now we go back to the main page, so we hit the return button, which is line select key 6 left. We go to the payload page, and you can see we can configure our passenger and cargo load. For this flight, we're going to be flying at a 0 fuel weight of 520,000 pounds, so we're not going to mess around with the specifics of the load, but we're just going to enter in a 0 fuel weight. So we'll load that, hit line select key 2 right, and you'll see that all these other numbers have changed, but the 0 fuel weight is what we need it to be at. You'll also notice here that on the upper right corner next to line select key 1 right, it lists the gross weight and the max takeoff weight. And then your takeoff center of gravity on the next line, so you'll be able to see if you're within limits. Already we're now on page 23 of the manual, and if you look at the top of the page 23, you'll notice there's a route we're going to fly. So the manual shows course 3, Voaxa, Q136, Oscar Alpha Lima, which is the Coaldale VOR, Inyo, Diam 3. So course 3 is the departure procedure, and the Voaxa is the waypoint that follows it. After that, we'll be flying along the Q136 airway to the Coaldale VOR. After that, direct to Inyo, and then we'll start the arrival into San Francisco. It may be listed in slightly different formats depending on where you're getting the flight plan from, but we're not going to worry too much about that. So now we're going to start loading up the FMC and the basic sequence. You do the position initialization first, airport entry, departure entry, and route entry, start and approach entry, route activation. So if we go back to the menu by clicking the menu button, we'll go to the FMC, so line select key 1 left. This is the ident page, or identification page. And you don't enter anything here, you just verify that any of the information is accurate. In the manual, you'll see that it's showing AIRAC 1701, which is valid from January 5th to February 1st of 2017. Over here on my screen, it's AIRAC 2305, which is valid from May 18th to June 15th of 2023. So what I have is more up to date. And basically, if you get a nav data out of date message, just clear it, because that's just telling you that the navigation data is not within the range of what you have your simulator set to. The active range, in my case, is May 18th to June 15th of 2023. So let's say I were to set the simulator to May 15th, which is 3 days before May 18th. I would get the nav data at a date message. So your simulator would have to be set to be within the active range for that message not show up. So now we go to line select key 6 right for the position initialization, and then we enter in the airport Kilo Delta Echo November, and then that goes into the reference airport line, which is line select key 2 left. And then we go line select key 1 right to go to the route page. Basically, we need to enter here our departure, arrival, and flight number. So according to the manual, the departure airport, Kilo Delta Echo November, and then arrival, Kilo Sierra Foxtrot Oscar. For the flight number, they want us to use PMDG 744. So we're going to enter that in and go line select key 2 right. So your completed route page should look similar to this. We don't have the ACARS active, so the send button isn't there. Instead, it's got a select button. So for the purpose of this flight, we're not going to worry about that minor detail. You could select a runway over here if you wanted to, but it's not really the best way to do that. So we're going to go to the departure and arrival page, which looks something like this. And then if you wanted to look it up for different airports, you could go to line select key 6 left or 6 right, depending on whether you want departure or arrivals. But right now we're just focusing on Denver. So line select key 1 left to pull up the departures for Denver, and as you can see, there's 4 pages here. We want to select runway 17 right, but it's not on this page because there's a lot of runways at this airport and only 5 lines of which you could display stuff. So if you click next page, you'll see runway 17 right. So you want to select runway 17 right, which is line select key 1 right. And by doing so, 2 things will happen. Number 1, runway 17 right will show up on the navigation display. And number 2, the departure procedures that show up on the left side will be only the ones that apply to that runway. In other words, you're not going to get the whole list of departure procedures that don't apply. We want the Course 3 departure according to the manual. We don't have the Course 3 departure because it's out of date, so we're going to select the Course 6, which is close enough, and then we'll use the VOAXA transition because that's what we need. And you'll notice that there's a blue dashed line that shows up, and that's basically the route as it's being entered in. It's not active yet. We'll cover that in a little bit. So line select key 6 right to go back to the route page, and then we go to the next page to pull up something that looks like this. This is going to look a little bit different than what's shown in the manual because, again, we're using more up-to-date navigation data and the procedures have changed just slightly. So after VOAXA, we fly along Q136, which is an airway. So you type in Q136, drop that on the left side below the Course 6 VOAXA transition. So line select key 2 left. And you'll note that it actually works. If you entered in something that didn't work, it would tell you invalid entry, and then you'd have to figure out what went wrong. Maybe you made a typo or something, but in this case, because it actually worked, you know it exists. So from Q136, we're going to go to Coaldale. So you're going to type in Oscar Alpha Lima and drop that in line select key 2 right. Oh, well, that didn't work. The reason that didn't work was I made a typo, and instead of Oscar Alpha Lima, I put November Alpha Lima. But that's the point I'm trying to get at, showing you that if it didn't get entered incorrectly, then you'd get invalid entry, and then you'd have to figure it out. So we dial in Coaldale, and then after that, we would enter in Inyo, which is a direct. You're going to enter it into line select key 3 right, because that's a waypoint. You don't want to do 3 left. In fact, let me show you what happens if I try that. Invalid entry, it didn't work, because that makes no sense with it being an actual waypoint. So you go line select key 3 right, and you'll notice on the left side it shows direct. So it is direct. Now your route page should look something similar to this. Again, a little bit different from what's shown in the manual right now because we have gotten up-to-date navigation data. So go back to the departure and arrivals. This time we want the arrivals at San Francisco, so you want line select key 2 right. And the manual calls for the Diam 3 arrival, which we don't have because it's out of date. So we're going to go Diam 5. Inyo transition, so line select key 2 left. And then we want the ILS for runway 28 right, so we'll select 28 right. And then we want the Archie transition. I'll go over in a little bit why that is the case. So your completed arrivals page should look something like this. So, and then this is what your routes page would look like. So if we go to the legs page, we're going to double check all our waypoints. If you go up to the EFIS panel, you want to scroll over to plan. And then basically what you're doing is looking at the navigation display and cross-checking your waypoints, so to make sure everything looks the way it should. So we've got an initial climb of 5,934 feet, so we'll fly on a 173 heading up to that altitude before we start our turn. And then to go to the next waypoint, you go line select key 6 right, which is the one that says step. So the next waypoint is Foams. Now the manual shows that Burrs has an altitude of 10,000 feet or below. That waypoint doesn't exist here, but Foams looks like it's a waypoint that matches that description, so I'm guessing they changed the name of the waypoint when they changed the procedure. So the B next to 10,000 means at or below. So as long as you're below that altitude, you're good. And then IPAL has a restriction of 12,000, at or above 12,000, then Malson at or above 14,000, and Bolt at or above 16,000. And then Coors at or above 17,000, and then Boaxa. So if we go to the chart now, this is the chart for the Course 6 departure. From runway 17 right, when we take off, we'll climb the 5,934 feet and then make a right turn towards Foams at or below 10,000. Then IPAL at or above 12,000, Malson at or above 14,000, Bolts at or above 16,000, Coors at or above 17,000, and then straight towards Boaxa. So that basically matches up what we were just looking at in the FMC. And the purpose of the altitude restrictions here is to make sure that the traffic departing out of Denver doesn't interfere with the traffic that's arriving into Denver, because otherwise you'd have a bit of a kerfuffle. So we'll double check the rest of the waypoints and just pay attention to the line, the dash line on the nav display to make sure nothing is out of the ordinary. So we'll go step, step, step. Basically, you're just looking for anything that seems out of the ordinary. And now here we are at Coaldale, Inyo. And now we're at Diamond, which has speed and altitude restrictions. The manual is showing that there's an altitude restriction, but no speed restriction. However, that was when it was the Diamond 3 arrival. We're now on the Diamond 5 arrival, so the procedures changed twice. So they've added in the speed restriction at some point. The next one is lane at 280 knots between flight level 220 and 260, which you'll note by the B after flight level 260 and the A after flight level 220. So we'll step through that. Flows has a speed restriction of 280 knots at between flight level 190 and 14,000, which you can't really see right now. Seeds has one at 250 knots between 11 and 12,000. If I click step again, now you can see where the speed restriction is for flows at 280 knots. Frelly has a speed restriction 230 knots at or above 8,000, and then we have to cross Archie at 7,000. So if we pull up the charts, you'll see that this is the Diamond 5 arrival from Inyo. You go to Diamond, which again, the speed restriction is there. 290 knots at or above flight level 270. Lane at or above flight at 280 knots between flight level 220 and 260. Always doesn't have a restriction. Flows 280 knots between flight level 190 and 14,000. Seeds at 250 knots between 10 and 12,000. Frelly at 230 knots at or above 8,000, and Archie at 7,000. And then you look at the next few waypoints afterwards. Archie at 7,000, Zild at or above 6,000. Gur at or above 5,000. Alright, you can go away. Dumba at or above 4,000. Seepin at or above 3,000. Axmal at 1,800, and all of this is outlined on the chart, and then that's going to put you on runway 28 right. And then you got the missed approach dialed in there as well if we were to do that. So now that we've double checked that everything is good to go, we've got we could go back to the map view. And when you fly other flights, you might have discontinuity, and that's basically when you've got waypoints that don't share a common waypoint. And not all departure or arrivals procedures put you directly on a waypoint. Sometimes you have air traffic control giving you radar vectors, and I'll demonstrate this in another video. You don't want to close the discontinuity right away, because if you did, the airplane might be doing something you didn't want it to do. It says here in the manual that you could go to the plan mode to check and run through all the steps to make sure everything is good to go, which we've already done just now, so we're not going to do that again. Now that we've verified everything's good, we'll go ahead and activate the route. So hit activate, which is line select key 6 right. You'll notice that the execute button lights up. Click on it, and now the route is active. You'll notice on the navigation display that instead of having the dashed blue line, it's now the magenta line, which means that the route is now active. if we go back to the first page of the legs page, you'll notice that we still have some blank spots here with no information about speed or altitude. That's because those are predictions and we haven't dialed anything in for the airplane to predict anything. So now we need to actually go ahead and do that. So to do that, you click Initialization Reference, and that's going to take you to the Performance Initialization page. So the blank boxes that you see is the boxes where you have to manually enter stuff in. Now, PMDG has actually made it easy because on the actual airplane you have to manually dial all the stuff in. But to avoid you having to go through the payloads page and whatnot and check in case you forgot how much your weights were, PMDG has made this easy so you could just click on whatever it was you were trying to click on and it would automatically pop up as though you were typing it in. So let's say for the zero fuel weight, we had 520,000 pounds. You could manually type it in yourself, or if you forgot that that was what weight you had, you could just line select key 3 left. It would pop in that value and then you just type it in again, or click it again rather, and it would go in. You'll note that the gross weight box automatically entered in a value, and that's because you only need to enter either the gross weight or the zero fuel weight. It's basically going to do a calculation based on the fuel you have. So if you enter in a zero fuel weight, it's going to add on the fuel to give you your current gross weight. According to the manual, we want reserve fuel of 30. So we're going to go 30.0. Line select key 4 left. This information is just advisory. It doesn't really affect anything. Basically, if the airplane's going to go below that value, or it predicts that you're going to go below that value on the fuel, then it's going to tell you insufficient fuel on the FMC. For the cost index, we're going to fly this flight at 100 per the manual. So the cost index basically is a cost calculation measurement, for lack of a better term. On the 747, it's between 0 to 9,999, and the way it works is the lower the number you use, the more cost effective the flight is, because you have a lower operating cost, but you're also flying the airplane pretty slow to achieve that lower operating cost. With the higher number, you'll be able to fly the airplane faster, but your operating costs are going to go up because you're burning a lot more fuel just to be able to fly faster. So for this flight, we're using 100. Depending on the airline, different airlines have different policies regarding cost index, so we're just going to go with what the manual says and not worry too much about it. Cost index is not a linear function, it's logarithmic, and most of the changes happen at the lower side of the spectrum between 0 to 1800. Now we got to enter in our cruise altitude, so we type in 380 and then line select key 1 right, and there you go. So this is what this page should look like after you're done with it. Now, if you want to go to the legs page and have a look, now that we've entered in all the information we needed, the airplane's able to calculate, what the speeds are and stuff, and altitudes. So now it's predicting that at this waypoint we'll be at this speed and this altitude. So if we go back to the init ref button, you click that, we are on the takeoff reference page, but we need to adjust our thrust limits here. So line select key 6 right, and basically you set that before you set anything on the takeoff page, because otherwise if you change anything here, it's going to affect your takeoff speeds and whatnot. So if you already set your takeoff speeds, it's just going to delete them. For this flight, we're going to do an assumed temperature takeoff to save wear and tear on the engines by limiting them to less than maximum takeoff and climb thrust. In the real world, the dispatcher would figure that out and you just enter that stuff in. So for this flight, we're going to fly with an assumed temperature of 58. So you're going to type in 58 and then line select key 1 left to set it. Look at the EPR on the FMC. You'll notice right now we haven't set anything. The EPR is at 1.58. As soon as we dial it in, now it goes down to 1.41. Basically what it's doing is telling the engine's computers to act as if the air was less dense than it actually is. So it would reduce the EPR limits. Now, this should automatically set the climb thrust at climb 1 if it didn't. Go ahead and select that. So your completed climb thrust or thrust limit page should look like this. Now we go to the takeoff reference page by line select key 6 right. We're going to do a flaps 10 takeoff today, so dial in 10 and go line select key 1 left. We do need to enter in a CG value so we could get our trim setting. But PMDG has again set it up much like the performance initialization page to where it'll just copy it for you. So line select key 4 right, you get a number 24. Line select key 4 right again, and then you'll get a trim. Then to get your V speeds, you want to select it on the FMC because right now we don't have anything set. So line select key 1 right, 2 right, and 3 right. And now you'll notice that instead of saying no V speed, now it's on the airspeed tape. So this is where your completed takeoff reference page should look like. And now we finish setting up the FMC. Already out of 113 pages of the manual, we are now on page 51. So we're going to go ahead and get the airplane set up. So you're going to set the trim to whatever the FMC tells you. And to do that, you're going to look at the trim setting here. Right now it's set to 6. And there's various different ways to set the trim depending on how you have your simulator set up. Because I'm using a yoke and throttles, I'm going to use the trim switch on my yoke to do it. Alright, 5.2, close enough. So that's set. We're going to set the flaps to 10. And if you're using the keyboard, you could just hit F7 3 times, assuming you haven't changed the default commands. But since I am using this, flaps 10. You could also move the flaps lever here if you wanted to, but we don't need to do that here. Set the auto brakes to RTO, looking at the pedestal, which we're already at RTO. Alright, now we need to set up the MCP. So for the speed, you want to set it to the V2 speed, which is 155 for us. The heading you want to set to 173 in this case, which is the runway heading. And then as far as the altitude, you want to set it to 10,000 because that's the first altitude restriction. We don't want to take the chance that it's going to exceed it, even though the VNAV would stop it from doing it. But it's already at 10,000, so we're good. Now we could go ahead and turn on the flight directors. And you have to make sure you turn on both of them, otherwise stuff might not work properly. So you notice on the PFD, you get a large display that says FD, which stands for flight director, and then above that is the FMA. Right now it says TOGA. So check your auto throttle arm switch, make sure it's up, which you typically wouldn't touch it, so it should always be up. Go ahead, arm the LNAV and VNAV, and you'll notice that on the FMA, it shows up in white to indicate that they are armed. After takeoff, when you're 400 feet above the ground, it will actually engage. So your PFD should look like that, and then your MCP should look like that. There's literally one page 55, that shows you what the MCP is supposed to look like, because the manual has it kind of on its side, but if you want to look at it on its side, there you go. As far as the EFIS setup, we're going to first set the transponder to 2200 as per the manual. So that's set. And then make sure the transponder is set to TARA, which it is. And then make sure that the barrow is on the EFIS is set to inches of mercury rather than hectopascals. We are in the United States, so the altimeter setting is given in inches, which in this case it is already set, so we don't have to worry about that. To verify the integrated standby flight display is set to inches of mercury as well. Well, this particular airplane, I don't know how this manual is written because this configuration isn't using that, so we're just going to ignore that. But if you did have the integrated standby flight display, then that's what it would do. Press the data button located just below the EFIS map range selector to basically give you the data when you cross each waypoint, which we have done. If you notice, if I click it, it goes away, but we want the information, so. Alright, now we want to set up the overhead because we are pretty much ready to go. So we're going to turn on the landing lights, the runway turn-off lights, the taxi lights. Beacon should already be on both. Nav light should already be on. We'll go ahead and turn the strobe lights as well. And your lights should now look like this. If you were flying at night, you'd turn on the wing and logo lights as well, but we're not, so we're pretty much good to go. And now we're pretty much ready for departure. Depending on how quick we did this, you may have lost quite a bit of fuel. So we're going to want to put it back to 75,000. We're down to 72,200 pounds now. So we've been at it for quite a bit of time, but we're already on page 60 of the manual. And page 60 just shows you what the overhead should look like. So now we're on page 61. Congratulations, out of 113 pages, we're already halfway there. So right now I'm going to go over what's supposed to happen here for the takeoff as per the manual before we actually do the takeoff, because once we start the takeoff, things are going to happen very quickly. So once we get the airplane rolling, you want to release the parking brakes. You can do that by tapping the brakes. You want to smoothly advance the thrust levers till the ICAS display is approximately 50% N1. So you're looking at the upper ICAS. The N1 is going to be that second row, and 50% is about where the bottom of the N1 text actually is. Once you're stabilized at 50% N1, you can go ahead and engage TOGA. You can do that by the keyboard shortcut, or there's a click spot right next to the auto throttle arm switch, that little screw over there. On the actual airplane, you'd hit those two paddles on the thrust levers, but it's not practical to turn and look and do that, so that's why PMDG has implemented the shortcut. In my case, I've got this. I got the paddles. I could do that, so that's what I'm going to do. So once you hit toga, the thrust is going to increase to an EPR of 1.41, which is what you have it set to. The auto throttle mode will become thrust rep followed by hold. That's going to be on the left side of the FMA. Once toga is activated, you do want to push your thrust levers all the way up, because what happens in hold mode is that the servos on the thrust levers on the actual airplane will not be active in hold mode, so you as the pilot will have full control. And if you don't push your thrust levers all the way up and you have a hardware spike, for instance your throttle quadrant or thrust lever sent the signal to your computer, you may find that you will lose thrust during the takeoff. So it's always good practice to physically push your thrust levers all the way up. So during the takeoff roll, you want small amounts of forward pressure on the yoke until you reach 80 knots, and then use the rudder as necessary to maintain the center line. Once you hit V1, which is 142, you're committed to taking off, so you want to take your hands off the thrust levers so you don't have the inclination to pull the thrust levers back. V1 is your decision speed, so below that speed you could stop the airplane if you needed to. Above that, you're pretty much committed to taking off, because if you try to abort the takeoff, you will not have enough runway to get the airplane stopped safely. Now, of course, if you deem the airplane physically incapable of flight, then obviously you would stop the airplane, because you're still going to go off the runway, but it's better to go off the runway at a slower speed when you've already started rejecting the takeoff versus going off the runway at 200 knots. So once you hit VR, which was 148, I think it was, you're going to smoothly rotate around 2 to 2.5 degrees per second to get to 15 degrees and just nose up. Do not rotate the airplane fast. This is a very long airplane, and you will tail strike the airplane, I believe, around 12 degrees. So just take it nice and smooth. Once positive rate is called, you'll raise the landing gear, and then basically you're going to follow the flight director. You don't want to be chasing them, but just do it smoothly. Once we get airborne and cast an altitude of 5,934 feet, we are going to make a right turn as we briefed earlier. The flight director is going to command that, and we'll just follow it. At 1,500 feet, the aircraft will reduce the climb thrust and start accelerating at 250 knots. And as you accelerate, you want to trim the nose down, or input nose down trim, so that when you have the elevators at neutral, the airplane's not trying to pitch up. So we're doing a flaps 10 takeoff, and basically once you start passing the flap markers on the speed tape, that's when you start retracting the flaps. So the first marker you will see is flaps 5. Once we get past flaps 5 and we're assured that we're not going to drop below that speed, we'll bring it up to 5, and then the same with flaps 1 and flaps up. And then once we're at 250 knots in the climb with controls neutral, then we can go ahead and engage the autopilot. The manual says to engage the center autopilot, but I've got to switch to the left one, so I'm just going to do that. Really, it doesn't matter which one you use, but they all do the same thing. So I've gone through all of that. We're on page 66, going to go to page 67. So we are lights set, and let's go ahead and do this. Stabilized. Thrust ref.
Airspeed alive.
Thrust set.
80 knots.
Checked. You see we're in hold mode now.
V1.
Rotate. V2. Positive rate.
Gear up. LNAV. VNAV. Alright. We gotta do that right turn. You'll see that 5 marker on the airspeed tape. It's when we get above that we will start bringing the flaps up, but right now we're just climbing. And we're above 1500, so the climb thrust, or the thrust will reduce to climb thrust, and then the airplane's commanding a higher speed. So we'll drop the nose to accelerate the airplane. Once we get above that flaps 5 marker, we'll bring the flaps up to 5. Flaps 5. We'll do the same for flaps 1 and flaps up, so flaps 1. Flaps up. Alright, I'm gonna go ahead and put the autopilot on at this point. I personally wouldn't normally do it, but just for the purpose of the tutorial, we're gonna do that. Alright, so now we're on VNAV path, and we're getting near 10,000, so the airplane's going to level off here. Alright, so now that we're at 10,000, the airplane's going to try to accelerate because we're no longer restricted by a 250 knots below 10,000 feet rule. And you'll notice that when we cross foams, the FMA said VNAV out, or it changed to VNAV out. That's because the airplane wants to climb higher, but it can't because we have it set to 10,000 on the MCP. So to overcome this, we're going to set the MCP to flight level 380, and then altitude intervene by clicking on it. And then you'll notice that we go thrust rev VNAV speed. Also, since we're above 10,000, we could go ahead and turn the landing lights, runway turn off lights, and taxi lights off. So landing lights come off, turn off lights come off, taxi lights come off. The strobe lights stay on throughout the flight. The beacon light and nav lights both stay on. The nav light stays on whenever the airplane is powered, and the beacon light stays on whenever the airplane's, in the process of being moved. Also, at this point, you want the gear handle to be in the off position, but I've got my controls set to do that automatically shortly after getting the gear retracted. And that's to depressurize the hydraulics so we don't have the issues with the gear. Also, it's good practice to have the heading set to the direction you're flying, so that's what we're going to do here. Set it to 264, and anytime the airplane turns, you're going to go ahead and adjust the heading accordingly. So once we get above 15,000, you'll notice on the ICAS that it goes from climb 1 to climb. And that's because it's going to go basically do a full thrust climb because the air is less dense, so the transition basically happens gradually above 10,000. So we'll be getting more thrust out of the engines. Also, once we pass 18,000 feet, we are going to switch to the standard altimeter setting. So we'll be flying at the flight levels rather than an actual altitude. If you don't do this, the airplane will scream at you. So if we look at the bottom right corner of the primary flight display, which shows 29 or 9 or 2, we're passing through 18,000 now, and if I don't do anything at 300 feet above that, it's gonna go amber, like that. So we're gonna go to standard at this point. Now, because we took off at an altimeter at 29 or 9 or 2, and the standard altimeter setting is 29 or 9 or 2, nothing changed. But if we were using actual weather, more than likely we'd have a different altimeter setting, and so you'd see the altitude tape kind of jump a little bit. The reason for that is when we have a different altimeter setting, we're basically setting it to display the actual altitude at the airport, which would vary based on weather conditions and barometric pressure. At some point, you set it to standard so that everybody's on the same setting just for separation purposes, because otherwise you'd be sitting here constantly changing the altimeter basically throughout the entire flight because the pressure's going to be constantly changing. So above the transition altitude, we're at the flight levels now, so we're no longer at it like a specific altitude. So we're 14 minutes into the flight, and if you have a look at the navigation display, you'll notice that we're getting near the top of descent in about 20 miles. This is marked by that circle with TC. That arc below it is indicating where the airplane thinks we'll get to the altitude that's been dialed into the MCP, and takes into consideration our climb rate and such, so it'll basically adjust accordingly. And this is actually quite useful if you're trying to figure out whether you can make a crossing restriction or not, as would be the case if we had altitude restriction on the way down, which we do. We are an hour and 27 minutes into the flight. We're on page 73 of the manual, and we're getting ready to start our descent into San Francisco. So right now we're still at flight level 380. And now we have a message on the ICAS saying FMC message. We're going to go ahead and look at that, and it says reset MCP altitude. Basically, that's the airplane saying, hey, pilot, you haven't set to lower altitude yet. Normally, you'd set an altitude that the air traffic control, the lowest altitude the air traffic controller clears you for, but since we don't have any air traffic control here per the manual, we're going to set it to 1,800, which is the altitude for AXMO, which is the final approach fix for runway 28 right at San Francisco. So if you were using the automatic time compression as outlined in the manual, at this point you want to take it off, and then if you turned off the data on the EFIS, you want to turn it back on. In this case, we've left it on the whole time, So as you can see, it's on. And that's just so we have the altitude restrictions in front of us. Once we start a descent on the bottom right corner of the navigation display, we're going to have the vertical path deviation indicator pop up, and then that's going to tell us whether we're too high, too low, or we're on the calculated descent path. Additionally, the thrust will reduce to idle, and it'll be noted on the FMA. And then once it goes to idle, it'll go to the hold mode. You're going to want to bring your thrust levers all the way back, because just like the departure in hold mode, the servos on the thrust levers on the airplane are not active, so the pilot has full control. And if you've got a hardware spike and you leave them where they are now, you may suddenly find yourself at full thrust. So now that it's idle, we're going to physically pull the thrust levers back. And you'll see that the vertical path deviation indicator is now up, and we are a little bit high, but the airplane just started the descent, so. And you'll see that we're in hold mode now. If I were to then move the thrust levers, the airplane, I'd be manually controlling the thrust, but we're not going to do that. And that goes back to me saying earlier that if you left it at full power and you had a hardware spike, like it sent a signal to your computer for some reason, which it could do, especially if you have older equipment and stuff gets old, you're going to be in for a nasty surprise. So it's better to just physically do that. Now, during the descent, the airplane is going to try to maintain idle thrust unless the path between 2 points is shallow enough that it requires thrust, in which case it's going to do that. And if the descent path is too steep, you're going to have to use a speed brake to slow the airplane down. Right now I'm going to go through the rest of the manual, and then we'll fly the approach, because like the departure, things are going to happen very quickly. So if you go to the initialization reference page, you'll see we're on the approach page now because we're already in the air. We have to set the speed. So we're doing a flaps 30 landing today with the speed of 144. So line select key 2 right, click that, and then line select key 4 right to enter it in. And you'll notice at the bottom of the PFD on the left corner, we have the reference speed dialed in. And then since we're flying the ILS, we go to the nav radio page, double check that the ILS frequency is in there, which it is. If you look at the chart, 111.7 is the frequency. The identifier India Golf Whiskey Quebec, which will show up on the PFD as we get closer, the final approach course is 284. As you can see, 111.70 and 284 is set, so we're good there. And then we'll go back to the legs page. You'll notice on the PFD that on the upper left corner we have the frequency. We don't have the distance yet. We'll have the identifier when we get closer, but for now it's set. So we're going to go ahead and set the auto brakes to 3. For this approach. And you'll note that in the ICAS. Going to be doing a Category 3 Alpha ILS approach, so we don't have any minimums set, at least we shouldn't, so we're going to go ahead and actually take out the minimums on here. Again, when we get to flight level 180, we're going to set the altimeter to local airport setting by pressing the standard button on the barrow knob, and what's going to happen is the standard on the bottom is going to show the airport setting that you have set, which in this case, since we don't have any weather, it's going to be 29 or 9 or 2. So if we go back and have a look at the speed restrictions, just to refresh, we got 250 at Seeds, 230 at Pirelli and Archie. I don't know why the manual says 240 at Pirelli, but that's clearly not the case. Once we pass 10,000, we're going to turn the landing lights back on and the runway turn-off lights. And then once we get to Archie, we're going to be about 20 miles away from the airport, and things are going to happen very quickly, so I'm going to go over it now. When we get closer to the airport, we are going to use the MCP speed intervention to slow the airplane down. At Archie, we're going to slow to 210, which I'll demonstrate later, and then when we get to the flaps up marker on the PFD, we'll go to flaps 1 because that's the minimum maneuvering speed. So any slower than that, and we do have to go to flaps 1 or whatever flap setting may be. Once the localizer is alive at the bottom of the PFD, you see the diamond, or I'm sorry, the circles at the bottom and the right side of the artificial horizon. A diamond's going to pop up, and that'll let you know that it's alive, whether it be the localizer or the glide slope. And then we will arm them just so that they capture when we get to that point. At Zillid, we're going to slow to 180 and then go to flaps 5 as necessary. And then at Gur, we're going to slow to 160 and go to flaps 10 as necessary. Then, as we get to the flaps 10 maneuvering speed, we'll go to flaps 20 and slow to 154, which is the flaps 20 maneuvering speed. And then, just before Dumba, the localizer should capture. And then we want to arm the rest of the approach after that. At that point, we'll drop the landing gear, go to flaps 30 and slow to 149. That's VREF plus 5. So the VREF is 144, the final approach speed is 149 because we want to add at least 5 knots extra on our speed. So we'll never land at VREF. That's just a bit of a margin for error. So generally speaking, you have at least 5 knots, and if you had like winds, crosswinds, or gusts and whatnot, you'd add more, but for the purpose of this flight, we don't have to worry about that, so we'll be good. Somewhere down the approach, we'll arm the speed brakes, and then once we pass 2,700 feet, we'll climb to we'll set the MCP to 3,000, which is the missed approach altitude. Because once the ILS glide slope is intercepted, changing the MCP altitude is not going to affect anything. Once we pass 1,500, we'll see land 3 on the PFD, basically where it used to say, right now where it says CMD. That's going to show land 3, and then rollout and flare will be armed. So that's when we know that the auto land will take over. Once we touch down, wait for the auto throttles to bring the thrust levers to idle, then use thrust reversers and keep them active till 60 knots. And then disengage the autopilot and start braking manually below 60 knots. After that, we'll exit the runway, and that pretty much covers it for the landing. So let's go ahead and put this all into action. So now we're going down through flight level 1904, and I've kind of just talked through this whole thing. So we should be at 280 and we're not. So I'm gonna help the airplane by using the speed brakes. You can see the airplane does not like to slow down. Right, we're below flight level 180. We're going to set the altimeter to local airport setting, which again doesn't change because it's 299 or 2. We have clear weather. Had we had actual weather where we had a different setting, you'd see the altitude tape jump to a completely different altitude. Alright, we're going to stow the speed brakes now. You can always adjust the range of the navigation display as necessary, because right now there's just so much information on there, it's kind of hard to see what's going on, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And really, whatever you want to set it to is entirely up to you. Alright, we're coming up on seeds and the airplane's going to slow to 250 as per the speed restriction on the approach. Bring the range in. things are going to happen very quickly. I'm going to turn the MCP to the present heading. We are also passing 10,000 feet. We're going to go ahead and turn the landing lights on and the runway turn-off lights on. At this point, we're now on page 79 of the manual. Alright, you'll notice that the airplane is now slowing to 230. And you'll notice that up marker. Help you here. Whenever you're going below that up marker, you want to set it to flaps 1. But I'm waiting to get to Archie before I slow down any further. So now you'll see that we have the identifier India Golf Whiskey Quebec, and we're 27 miles away, and the localizer diamond's on the far left. So we're going to go ahead and arm it. And as we get closer, alright, now it's going to speed mode. So, as we kind of line up closer, the diamond will go towards the center, which is where you want it. Alright, we need to slow to 210. Flaps 1. And then once we cross Zillid, we'll slow to 180. So we'll slow to 180 now. Flaps 5. The transition from flaps 1 to flaps 5 takes longer, and vice versa, so I'm anticipating the airplane slowing down before I get to the 1 marker. And dropping the flaps accordingly. Now you can see the glide slope diamond is alive, and we're more or less along the glide slope, but we're not going to arm it just yet as per the manual. Once we pass GER, we're going to slow to 160 and then go to flaps 10 accordingly. Alright, slowing to 160. Flaps 10. And then once we get to the flaps 10 maneuvering speed, we'll go to flaps 20. You can't really see very well. It was kind of above the speed bug. Flaps 20. Right, just before Dumba, the localizer should activate and capture. When it does, we want to arm the approach because we're basically along the glide slope already. Localizers capture, let's go ahead arm the approach. And then once we get the glide slope, I'll drop the gear. Not gonna do that. Make sure the speed brakes are armed as well. We had to cross Seepin at 3,000. Alright, glide slope's captured, gear down. Laps 30. That was slow to 149. Alright, landing checklist. Gear down, or some, I'm sorry, speed brakes armed, gear down, flaps 30. Landing checklist completed. And then we want to set the MCP to 3,000. That's our misapproach altitude. And now you'll notice that it's gone to land 3. And rollout and flare are also armed. So the airplane will land itself at this point. We'll just sit back and watch. When we get closer to the runway, the RAS will announce approaching to a right, so that tells you that we're on the right runway, so. 1,000 feet stable, misapproach altitude 3,000 set.
Approach change 28 right.
Okay, so that was the RAS that just announced what runway we were approaching. And we have the runway in sight, so we're going to go ahead and land. Touchdown, first normal. knots. $60 knots manual brakes. Gonna turn left over here. And we're gonna stop at the whole short line up here. Alright, welcome to San Francisco International Airport, where the local time now is 12:21 p.m. in the afternoon. And congratulations on completing the tutorial. We are now on page 85, and that's actually the end of the tutorial. The remaining pages, I said this was a 113-page manual. The remaining pages include procedures for shutdown and cold and dark start, if you do wish to do that. We're not going to cover that in this video because the critical part for this video was the actual setting up the airplane and flying the airplane. So if you want to go ahead and do the shutdown secure procedures and figure out how to do the cold and dark procedures, have at it. In the meantime, if you've made it this far, congratulations. Have yourself a victory Coke. And that's a taste of victory. Of course, if you don't drink Coke or soda, it could be water or orange juice or something else. I don't recommend beer or any other alcohol, though. You really shouldn't be flying an airplane and drinking. Hope you guys enjoyed this video and hope it helped. And we'll be doing another video soon, so thanks for flying with us, and we'll see you again soon. Good day.